Hi guys, I am here with a true story for you tonight from our book Angels and Wonders, True Stories of Heaven on Earth. This one has a quote before it by Melvin Morris, Parting Visions. Most doctors do not regard these visions to be what they are. So true, they think you're crazy. Medicine for the soul, or maybe from the soul. The man in the photograph. It was especially cold that night as 18-year-old Johnny Bryan and his older cousin Donald left their home in Tulsa. The two were headed to the town of Vane, where Donald had lived until he moved in with Johnny's mom, Aunt Tressie. Donald's girlfriend still lived near the Black Gum Mountains, so each weekend he eagerly drove back to be with her. Because there were horses and open plains in Vane, and because he loved to ride, Johnny usually accompanied Donald. That night, Tressie Bryan tried to persuade the boys to stay home. "What if a car breaks down and you freeze to death on a lonely road?" she asked. But the boys laughed affectionately at her concern. Didn't she know that weather warnings didn't apply to young adults? Tressie watched them leave and whispered a prayer for their safety. It wouldn't be much of a weekend for them if this snow and wind continued. It did. Saturday seemed even colder, and by Sunday, Tressie was counting the hours until the boys' return. She was used to hard winters, of course. She was an outdoors person, part Cherokee, and her beloved brother Buster had taught her to hunt and ride at an early age. Those had been good days, the two of them racing across the fields, even sharecropping together to help keep their younger siblings fed. And then they had grown up. The war had come, and everything had changed. The last time she had seen Buster was during his final furlough before leaving for a place called Anzio. Buster had taken Tressie's husband aside. "Don't tell Tressie," he had said, "but I won't be coming home." When the telegram came, it had hurt so much that she had put all his photographs away. Her son Johnny had never ever met him. She was rambling now, using memories to pass the time, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As darkness fell, she paced restlessly, peering out at the snow-covered landscape. Where were they? 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, midnight, and still no boys. They had never been this late before. At 2 a.m. the phone rang. It was Donald, calling from the hospital in Broken Arrow, about 20 miles away. "The car skidded on the ice patch, turned over and threw us out, Aunt Tressie," he said. "I'm okay, but Johnny hurt his leg. He's unconscious, so they're not sure if he has other injuries. I'll come right away," Tressie promised. She prayed all the way to the hospital, and when she arrived, Johnny had regained consciousness. The doctors decided to release him. Relieved and grateful, Tressie and Donald helped him into the back seat of the car and adjusted his bandaged leg. Donald jumped in front, and Tressie drove carefully on the snow-covered highway. Johnny was a bit subdued, but seemed completely rational. It was almost dawn when they reached home. Donald got out to open the front door, while Tressie helped Johnny out of the back seat. He hobbled toward the porch with one arm around her shoulder. Suddenly he stopped. "Mom," he asked, "who was this man on the other side of me?" "Why," Tressie frowned. Had the bump on Johnny's head given him hallucinations? "There's no one on the other side of you, Johnny," she said carefully. "See, there's Donald up on the porch." Johnny said nothing more. The following day, however, Tressie broached the subject again. If her son had a concussion, she should report it to his doctor. Johnny, why did you ask me about a man? Mom, when I woke up in the hospital, there was a man standing at the door of my room, Johnny began earnestly. One of his feet was crossed over the other as he leaned against the door looking at me. He was wearing white pants, white shoes, and a long white coat, and his hair was jet black. I imagine it was the doctor, Tressie ventured. You must have been confused being bumped on the head. Maybe, Johnny admitted, but when we drove home, the same man was sitting next to me in the back seat. He was looking at buildings around us, like he was really interested. Then when you helped me out of the car, he was at my side until we got to the door. He looked at me and said, "You'll be all right now." That's why I wondered if he was someone from the hospital. No, Tressie answered. There was no one in the back seat with you, Johnny. She was worried. Although the accident had turned out to be minor, Johnny was apparently more injured than she thought. What should she do? She was still thinking about it later when the telephone rang. A nurse from Broken Arrow Hospital was calling. She and her husband had been driving behind the boys and were the first to come up on the accident scene. It was the oddest thing, Mrs. Bryan, the nurse said. When the car rolled over, its top hit the pavement in such a way that it formed a little dent, and the dent protected your son's head and shoulders before he was thrown out of the car. Johnny should have died from head injuries, the nurse believed, but I wanted to let you know that I think he was being watched over in a very special way. Tressie agreed. Whatever Johnny's problems now, she was just grateful that he was alive. However, nothing seemed to be wrong with her son. He never mentioned the man again and resumed his life as if nothing had happened. Tressie remembered to thank God every night for averting a terrible tragedy and gradually forgot about Johnny's strange experience. You know that's going to be her brother, his uncle, right? Years later, after Johnny moved out, Tressie was organizing a closet and came across some old family photographs. There was Buster in photos she had taken right before he left for Italy. My favorite one I had forgotten about was of him standing with one foot crossed over the other, leaning against a rock, she says. And there was another, a close-up of him without a hat. Tressie gazed at the photos. It was time to remember Buster again, she decided. She would have the pictures enlarged. A short time later, Johnny popped in for a visit. He raided the refrigerator, then ambled into the living room, stopping in front of the photos now hanging on the wall. He stared. "Mom, I don't believe this." "Don't believe what?" "Remember years ago when Donald and I were in that accident?" Johnny's eyes were huge. Of course, Tressie would never forget that night. "This is the man, Mom. The man I told you about, who was standing at the door looking at me. His foot was crossed and he was leaning just like this." "But that's impossible, Johnny. This is your Uncle Buster. You've heard me talk about him. He was killed in the Second World War. You couldn't have met him at the hospital or any place else. Mom, his face and that black hair are plain in this close-up. I've never forgotten him. He was with me in the car, and he helped me to the front door. And he said," Johnny's voice softened in memory, "he said I'd be all right now." Tressie thought of the accident and her son's astonishing escape, of the nurse's belief that he was being protected in a special way. Finally, she thought of Buster, who had always cared for her. "I won't be coming back," he had told Tressie's husband. But who was to say that those who loved us on earth could not still love us from heaven? "Johnny is grown now and has a family of his own," Tressie says today, "and I hope the man with the dark hair is still watching over all of us." Good night, guys.